Black.
Good morning and welcome to the Neutral Zone. It's Monday morning and I'm Jason Schwartz. The Neutral Zone is brought to you by the Maui Miracle. Okay, I hope you're hearing this commercial for the Maui Miracle. And our other sponsor, donor, is Cash for Gold Come Ein Alone. This is Jason Schwartz. I'm here with a wonderful guest today. We're the Neutral Zone, and as you've already learned, the Neutral Zone has a small little subscript that says we're anything but neutral. But we like to speak to everyone and be fair and open about discussing ideas. Even though it may be a political year, when all the dust settles, we are one. And that's the attitude that we carry with us. I have a really interesting and fun guest today. This is a gentleman that many of you know. Do you know Rob Parsons? Rob, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Jason. Great to be here.
I was holding out my hand. We're on Facebook Live, so you may see me do things that are kind of animated. There we go. Okay. Rob, what would you describe? I would say environmental coordinator, assistant, advisor to the Mayor of Maui County. What would you call yourself?
Well, I'm the Maui County Environmental Coordinator. I'm now in my 12th year in that capacity. It was a position that was originally created by Mayor Arakawa.
A little bit closer if you can.
Sure.
Yeah.
Created by Mayor Arakawa when he was first elected back in 2003. So I served then till 2006, and then came back when he was reelected in 2010 and been here since 2011. I used to serve on the 9th floor as an executive assistant to the mayor for environmental concerns, and have since moved over about 5 years ago to the Mayor's Office of Economic Development, which is a wonderful place to be. Great things, great team. And I'm there because among the many grants that they disperse, over 100 grants come out of that office. There are many that are addressing environmental protection issues. So I have the opportunity to work with some of the conservation heroes of this island. Maui Invasive Species Committee, some of our watershed partnerships, Maui Nui Marine Resource Council, Maui Huliau Foundation, people who are doing great on-the-ground conservation work, and also like environmental education as well. Maui Huliau Foundation teaches filmmaking skills to intermediate and high school kids, and they make environmental films. And that's one of the many grants that comes out of our office.
Okay, so environmental coordinator, does that mean you advise? You're not giving out any money. You're advising and directing things to be sure they are, in your opinion, responsible for the island's long-term health?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And there are a number of, when people talk about how the county serves them, there are many different departments that have grants. The Department of Water Supply oversees about a dozen watershed protection grants. The Department of Environmental Management, Environmental Protection and Sustainability Division has a recycling grants pool of money. I sit on that advisory board as well. And then, as I said, in our office, we have a whole section of environmental protection grants. So there's millions of dollars that the county is investing into our future by protecting our natural resources, by restoring our natural resources. It's inspiring work on our best days, and frustrating because it's a ponderous bureaucracy on other days. That's the nature of things in county government.
That's well said. You work for the mayor, and he gets into all kinds of things that get controversial. But the one thing that I know is you're there in advisement, right? And so do you sit in on decisions when things happen? You don't always get things exactly as you might see them, I would imagine, but you put your 2 cents up. Is that how it works?
Yes. As I said, I did spend a number of years on the 9th floor, a few years on the 9th floor, and so it was a little physically closer when meetings took place. I'm now in a different building in One Main Plaza. There's a lot of county offices that are not in the county building, and so there's at least 4 different departments in One Main Plaza, and we're one of them. So
tomorrow morning I have a meeting, by example, at One Main Plaza with Stuart Stanton, Mike Miyamoto, about freestanding water systems. And some people said to me, well, why didn't you go see Gladys Bisa? Well, maybe. But if you're around, I hope you can join us. This gentleman coming, they've been in all kinds of emergencies around the world. And I keep thinking that freestanding, self-sustained, decentralized water has to be a really important thing on this island, especially if one wants to do conscious development, or one wants to get all the water going back into the streams and figure out some way of making sense so this island in the long run can have everything. So I'm just openly mentioning by example.
Yeah, for clarification, because we talked about this a little bit before we came on the air, you're talking about basically a water from air machine. We live in a very humid climate, but even in less humid climates, this technology is something that has been around for a little while and continues to be refined, so that rather than drill big expensive holes in to go tap the aquifer.
$75,000 you might spend in trying to tap an aquifer,
or much
you
more
might
than
own a unit for life and be self-sustained and separate.
And it's the same idea that a air conditioner or a dehumidifier is going to condense water as it operates, and then you capture that water and you filter it, and you've got some really pure water. I know, because I've done some testing on these type of machines. So yeah, that's really interesting that you're going to be meeting with the gentleman representing that technology tomorrow, and including the director and deputy director of our Department of Environmental Management, which includes solid waste division, wastewater division, where they have millions of gallons of treated wastewater. That's some of it's injected, some of it's used for recycled uses, irrigation. So hey, all of these new ideas, fresh ideas and technologies that we can bring to our old ways of thinking, I'm all for it. It can only benefit us. That good information.
So I'm trying to think of where to go. I think, although everything is broken out into different departments, it all comes together. That's why Stuart Stant was on our show with Mike, actually, a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
But what I thought is, these guys expressed a real openness, just like you do, to hear and know what's going on, because although things are in place, they're open to know as our needs are changing and expanding. And that's really thing. Do you feel you have an open kind of ear? A lot of people think that our mayor is so fixed sometimes in his positions that they don't think he's thinking. But you find he is sensitive and listening to when you bring ideas in? Or does it something shape? You hear all the criticisms, I'm sure, I imagine.
Well, I know what you're addressing, and I would just say that I've continued to have a good relationship with the mayor. He can be adamant when he's in support of something or against something, and yet I think particularly on environmental issues, not every one, but a number of them, and renewable energy issues, he's taken some leadership. And I just returned from better part of a week in San Francisco at the Global Climate Action Summit.
Which is really the main reason we're sitting here today. I really am looking forward to having you share some of the jewels that came out of that and everything.
Right.
The only reason I was bringing up the thing about the mayor is, I think sometimes the newspapers do better to find something spicy and put a slant on it that makes it more controversial, sells more papers. But you have found that he is receptive, and with all the things that he's now trying to do and go further, I think it's important for people to understand and know how someone like you has been an influence here, and how, again, if he were to be on council, for example, I don't know if you'd be on position with him, but he's been able to rely on you to go looking. That's what this conference is to me, with all that's going on. Who inspired this conference to happen?
It was largely inspired by California Governor Jerry Brown, but he brought in some other key figures such as the United Nations Environmental Program. It really was global leaders from across the planet. And I think the number that I heard was about 4,500 people attended in San Francisco.
That's great.
There were some very well-known people. Al Gore spoke. Jane Goodall, Jean-Michel Cousteau was there. So it was very focused on reducing carbon emissions. There's an omission in how we're addressing our emissions, but not just that. There's kind of a broad list of what makes sense for moving into the future that is going to include an ever-increasing population. And we just, we're invested in the way things are. But when you bring up, just one new technology, technology is not going to save the world. It's going to help us make better decisions, but we each can do something. And I've talked to a lot of people that feel, we're screwed, it's hopeless, we've really messed up our planet. But I tend to be optimistic about some things. I think it is very dire, and we need to do much, much more as soon as we possibly can. But there's great human spirit and ability to look at the world around us and go, I need to do something. I'm going to do something. And there was a lot of people that brought that spirit to the Global Climate Action Summit.
These people that brought this, would you say that there are leaders in there that will be heard by people? I mean, I'm, for example, here thinking, when I think of leaders, I don't know how others define them, I think about Lucien Dene and Al Perez and Mark Sheehan and these guys that have been, and Rob Parsons, holding the banner for responsible environmental solutions globally, but surely by us being involved personally. And I think that's the message I hear from you.
Yeah, good of you to mention some of our real local heroes and people that I've worked with for the past 20 years, and people that I count on because I know that they will do their homework and they will bring real accurate information to any topic of discussion they're addressing. And they're advocates, and at heart I'm an advocate, and I'm an information gatherer, and I think that's how you do it. And that's what you're doing here today, Jason.
Absolutely.
You're providing a venue, as you always do, for people to share good information that can help others make conscientious decisions in how we address community issues and natural resource issues, environmental issues.
Well, thank you for noting that. So, this global conference, would you say you could give us a couple of bullet points of things you think are significant that we should know or we could implement here?
I'll do my best. I attended a number of sessions over 4 or 5 days that I was there, and I went on the mayor's behalf. The mayor stayed back because Hurricane Olivia, Tropical Storm Olivia, was bearing down on us, and he didn't feel that it was the right thing to do to travel to California when there was some impending doom. And it was so ironic, Jason, that he was not the only one. There were mayors from South Carolina, the East Coast, who said, as soon as we finish this session, I'm hopping on a plane. I've got to get back before Florence hits, before Hurricane Florence hits. And so it was ironic but poignant that people were not able to attend or had to leave a climate action summit because of climate events. This is, and here's one tidbit that I heard one of the mayors say, because I went to the U.S. Conference of Mayors meeting the day before, and then I went to a climate mayors breakfast the first full day of the conference on the mayor's behalf. And one of those mayors said, what we used to call an aberrant event, unusual event, is now becoming the new norm. So all over the globe, you can pick up the newspaper and find that there are climate events happening, and that's the world we live in and the world that we really need to address.
Well, yes. I think, though, as much as it all happens globally, you know, that was an old expression, right? Think globally, act locally. What can we do? I mean, did that come out of it? I know that. What do the mayors do? They are responsible and have people like you helping steer the rudder. What other things do you see that we can do?
I handed you a card before we started that has a number of Mayor Arakawa's and Maui County's climate actions on it. And for me, this was just a way to tabulate and just remind myself before going to this conference that we have done some things here that are putting us on the right path. One of them was just about a year ago, Mayor and I went to Oahu, drove all the way out to Waianae because the Hokulea was in Waianae Harbor, berthed there. And on the deck of the Hokulea, the 4 county mayors signed a pledge to go 100% clean transportation, non-fossil free transportation by 2045. And they further pledged to have the county fleets get off fossil fuel by 2035. And if we don't set these kinds of goals, we're not going to get to them. And actually, when Energy Commissioner Fred Riddell and I went to the mayor's office to talk to him about participating in this pledge, and he says, I don't think it's enough, soon enough. He says, why don't we do 80% by 2030? So he wanted to up the ante. But
that's funny. I heard that about Donald Trump, about the travel ban, that he chose the one with the least restrictions. They gave him 8 choices, and the one that was the most freedom he chose. And that's an interesting thing to see, like who's advising. So Alan Arakawa is an environmental advocate in your
and renewable energy advocate, and you know, one of his visions is a consolidated base yard. Each of the departments that needs supporting vehicles and equipment has their own base yard here and there. And some years ago, in the council's budget, he made a proposal to purchase land in Waikapu to consolidate that, have a county base yard there where they could share resources, share, you know, mechanics, equipment, things like that. And one of his great ideas that I hope will be implemented sometime in the near future is to have a solar charging facility for electric vehicles there. So as the County of Maui transitions their vehicles from fossil fuels to electric vehicles, you've got solar PV and battery that can recharge them, and it doesn't have to be grid connected. So this would, you know, as we know, Hawaii has the highest percentage of fossil fuel electric generation in the nation. And people tend to forget that, but we're burning about 1 million gallons of diesel at our Malaya generating station every day. Yes, we do have a lot of wind power integrated, but we're still burning a lot of fossil fuel. And so unless you have your own solar PV, if you're just plugging into a charger at a shopping center or parking lot, that's coming off the grid, and that's generated in large part by diesel generation at the Malaya station.
So no gain, if you will.
Well,
no gain in our carbon footprint input.
Yeah, and you know, a lot of the discussion at Global Climate Action Summit was how will we reduce our carbon emissions? How do we progress towards carbon neutrality? There were pledges being made throughout the entire summit. Jerry Brown led a under 2-degree pledge. The Paris Accord has implored the nations of the world to reduce emissions so that we don't raise the temperature of the planet any more than 2 degrees over the next 50 to 100 years. And many people said that's still too high. We should pledge to cutting emissions so that it won't raise any more than 1.5 degrees hotter.
Any incentives that have they thought about or talking about besides tax credits? Any other things?
Yeah,
including?
One of the things that I found compelling is that there were actually protests when I went the first day. The streets were filled with sign wavers and people chanting, and it was very difficult to get into the venue, the Moscone Center South in San Francisco, which was walking distance from where I stayed in downtown San Francisco. And it was, I saw it on the news that night. Someone said only in America would there be climate protesters at a climate action event. And there was some irony there, but I also got what they were frustrated about. And they were frustrated that it's still corporations that are calling the shots and corporate lobbyists who are persisting with trying to get more fossil fuels out of the ground, whether it's oil shales or the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge or the gas pipeline. There are still some really big corporate entities that want to do things the way they've always done. There's a pledge to step away from coal. Any new coal excavation and any current coal generating plants. Then there was discussion from the leader of the National AFL-CIO. It said, hold on, not so fast. If you just say that we've got to stop all coal use now, you are going to bankrupt these communities throughout America that have been built on this for generations, and their pensions are going to be in jeopardy and their economies are going to crash. So there was some thoughtful discussion on the implications of every step that we take. You've often heard our elected leaders say, well, I'm not ready to vote on this yet because I'm unsure of the unintended consequences. And while I can appreciate that, it also drives me a little bonkers, because oftentimes I would say to them, there are consequences if you do nothing, and things stay the same.
Well, no, that's the really big point, isn't it? I mean, I'm going to change subject for a second, but when I hear about the water table going to be going up, and that middle of Kihei is planning, I mean, all the things that we see as beachfront are going to be somewhere starting the new Atlantis. They're going underwater. So I always wonder about that. How do we do the right thing? Because the intended consequences may not be for now. They may be for later, like you just said. How do you deal with that kind of stuff? Do you have that kind of stuff come up at you?
Yes. I have a pretty direct answer to that, and I think that we can follow the model that our partners over on the island of Oahu set up a couple of years ago. They put forth a charter amendment that people voted on in the November election in 2016 that said, should we establish in the mayor's office of the city and county of Honolulu, should we establish an office of climate change, sustainability, and resilience? And voters, by about 2/3 majority, said yes. Within the past year, I don't think they've even been in place for a year and a half, this Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency has gone gangbusters. They are doing great work. They're addressing these kind of threats. Sea level rise is one of them, but there are many, many others. And I think that we could, in the new administration that will be taking place here in Maui County starting next January, we could implement those kind of actions, which is have people directly addressing the threats that we know are coming our way. We don't know how soon, but I mean, if you pick up the Star Advertiser today, the cover story and photo is someone on North Shore Oahu who's lived there since 1965 that's looking at a big chasm because of the coastal erosion that's 20 feet from their house. And they're saying the state's not doing enough.
We're going to take a commercial break, or we don't call them commercials here, and we'll be back in a couple of minutes. I'm with Rob Parsons on KAKU, the Neutral Zone. I'm Jason Schwartz, 88.5 FM, Facebook Live, MauiNeutralZone.com. Let's get to see who has got something to say. Hang on.
I'm little teapot, short and stout.
Here is my handle and here is my spout.
No, Dad, like this. When I get all steamed up, then I shout, tip me over and pour me out.
This is WWE superstar Roman Reigns. It only takes a moment to make a moment. Take time to be a dad today.
Visit fatherhood.gov, brought to you by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services and the Ad Council.
The Grateful Dead played a different set list at every show. Since no two concerts were ever the same on stage, the same goes with the Grateful Dead radio program on KAKU 88.5 FM. Saturday night at 8 and Sunday night at 9, it's Dead Air. It's an hour of killer recordings, stories from the Tapers section, tall tales from the parking lot, and I'll throw in an interview from time to time. Hey, I'm Corey Daniels. Saturday night at 8 and Sunday night at 9, you'll get Dead Air on KAKU 88.5 FM, the voice of Maui.
Maui tiene un abogado en quien confiar. Maui Immigration Law. Todo lo relacionado a inmigración para tu asunto legal. La oficina del abogado Kevin Block debes llamar. Llama ahora 808-201-4303. 808-201-4303. Ya lo sabes, para estar legal, al abogado Kevin Block debes llamar.
Have you or someone you know been diagnosed with cancer? According to American Cancer Society, an average of 19 people a day are diagnosed with cancer in Hawaii. Pacific Cancer Foundation is a nonprofit organization that provides free support services for Maui's cancer community. Visit our website for a list of programs or to make a donation. We are all in this together. Call today, 242-7661, or visit our website, pacificcancerfoundation.org.
Maui Youth Now Show, focusing on youth culture today. This weekly half-hour show is produced by and created for youth, taking the pulse of youth culture from an island perspective. Watch local news, current events, fun challenges, trending videos, game reviews, and learn about other youth in your community. New episodes air on Tuesday at 4:30 p.m. on Akaku 55 or catch us on Vimeo.
The gene editing tool CRISPR offers new approaches to fighting disease.
Where instead of design drugs that one might have to take every day if you live with a genetic disease, could you use CRISPR to actually correct the mutations at the level of DNA and remove those mutations that cause disease in the first place?
The promise and possible consequences of rewriting genomes on the next Big Picture Science.
Well, hello again. This is Jason Schwartz. Someone just said to me, the little angels here, 88 and a half is not 88.5. There is no half in radio. There's a 0.5. 88.5 FM, KAKU, the voice of Maui. I'm Jason Schwartz, and you can find us up on the Facebook, all over the web. You can find all the shows, including this one, on MauiNeutralZone.com. And we hope we're creating a library of issues and people that will be valuable to you to revisit after the day we're here. I was talking with Rob Parsons about this thing that he gave me that I think he's going to put up on the web so you can get it. It really is very good. It informs us of where our power comes from. It breaks it down for us. And it also has different things about climate action that we have been doing here in Maui County. I am going to ask a funny question. Were you the one to lead on a lot of stuff, or did you find ideas came to you mostly?
In what
In all the things
capacity?
that are going on here. I mean, you mentioned the mayor's environmental, conscious, which is great. But I mean, some of the things that we're doing, you told me like he was aggressively did things that are, he's not afraid to be a leader and take the risk of having someone squawk. If he believes in it, he does it. And I appreciate that. That's what leaders do. So that's a good thing. With all the input, like you talked about our environmental heroes, there are a lot of things on here that the government has done. Have you seen private sector action in environmental things? I know you say you're in economic development. Is that a big part of our economic development future?
It sure is. Before I went to the summit in San Francisco, I sat with Energy Commissioner Fred Riddell. We are so fortunate to have someone of his character and experience serving in that role. And after we presented, what we could sense was going to be taking place at this Global Climate Action Summit, and Mayor initially wanted to go. However, with the impending tropical storm, and also there was a clean energy conference held on Friday in Honolulu, and he was set to go and speak on that with Fred. Well, Mayor stayed here. There were still storm things to deal with, and Fred went and gave the mayor's presentation. But for those reasons, the mayor didn't go to San Francisco, but he felt it was important to be represented there, so I went on his behalf. And before we left that meeting in the mayor's office, he said to us, well, we're doing all of these things because they make good environmental sense, but they also make good economic sense. And that's the bottom line for, a lot of the people, not all, but we do live in a world where economics, is a very guiding and motivating factor on political levels and on international levels. And so now that we have seen that clean energy is not just competitive, but in many cases is preferable to fossil fuels. As
Right.
Coal is never going to be what it was because it used to be the cheapest alternative, and that's not the case.
At these conferences, they talk about the retraining of all these people. Obviously, the coal people, it's going to go into history, those towns, unless they get retrained.
Well, it can't be forgotten. And, in our office, we do many things, and one of them is workforce development. And, we also have a film commissioner, we have an agricultural specialist, we do events like the Friday Town Parties and Mayor of Maui County Festival. We have, just a lot of specialists in different areas. And, one of them is job training, and work with MEO that provides the Core 4 classes that basically tells you how to write a business plan if you're interested in starting your own small business, and work with Maui Economic Development Board. They help co-sponsor our energy conference that we've held for the past 5 years. And so we're strong in our partnerships, and we do a lot of things.
Has the county, and again, I'm just fishing, ever reached out to any of the private companies here that could function as a bank to finance, I want to say, acceleration of different environmental programs that could be here and we could be an example to the world of what happens when you put in all these systems to be self-sustainable in our remote location. For example, an A&B, or I dare not say the word Monsanto, but I mean it, A&B, Monsanto, Goodfellow, people, deep pockets that on their financial statements could put together resources available and could provide, I will say, loans, and really help encourage some of these things to move forward. Is that something that is done at the county, or is that?
Yeah, I'm going to take it back to the Global Climate Action Summit, and there was the CEO of Unilever who was on stage at one point, and I was a little skeptical. I'm going, wow, I mean, of all corporations to choose. Here's somebody who has a tremendous amount of reach in I don't know how many countries. I didn't do the research, but they're, and it's usually when they've been in the press that I've read, it hasn't been good press. But it seems that the CEO was earnest and sincere in implementing sustainability into the core of their practices. And these things don't happen overnight. But because of the predicament that we're in, that we have created, as Al Gore likes to remind us, humans created climate change, and we can change our actions to counteract it. He's up there.
Hurry up, people.
Yeah. Well, when did An Inconvenient Truth come out? 2000 or 2001. So I concur that we're not doing enough and we're not acting fast enough. But
so did Unilever come out with anything that said we're going to step up? And
they made a number of pledges, and I don't have the exact ones here, but I think that was the nature of your question is what can those that have some clout, and whether or not they're doing all of what we think is the right thing, how can they contribute to the overall solution?
And what can they do here locally? Because in my mind, the county, a lot of people look to the government to solve the problem. When I looked to the private sector of someone that recognizes their problem and they have unique ability to be an important resource to move it forward. They've been such a strong center of the island at A&B or an HC&S with some of these larger players that have the financial capacity just on their value of land to do things that move a few decimal points, and they're able to take advantage of credits and really help here. Is that a government role, or has the government taken that role to ask some of these private sector people to be more involved in that?
My answer would be it's a government role and a community role, and obviously that private sector that has the ability and has the land and has some financial wherewithal. You got to find some way to get innovative leadership is part of it, and collectively understand. There's a lot of educational outreach. We're in our comfortable bubbles of what works, but and sometimes it's too shocking to give hard facts to people. They go, oh no, I don't even want to hear that. It's
Yeah, that's common, isn't it?
Yeah, it's ostrich head in the sand syndrome. It's difficult to hear the scenarios that are laid out by those who have told us that we've got to take action because of the 400 plus parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, and we continue to spew out more and more and more emissions. And one of the things that came up in conversation is we can do all that's in our power to drive hybrid vehicles, electric vehicles, to ride a bicycle or jump on the bus, and hopefully we'll transition to electric buses. But in one event, Kilauea spewed out so much emissions over 3.5 months that, we just look at, if I switched from my gas car to a hybrid, was I doing enough? And
right.
And the same is true with the wildfires. We've had our, the wildfires that were devastating to West Maui, to those families who had to evacuate, and some lost their homes and possessions and their way of life. And then that's happened on a much, much larger scale in the western United States and other places around the planet. So those emissions we can't do as much about. I think what the area of focus that needs to be given equal time or more time is in sequestering the carbon that's already in the atmosphere. And we have...
Sequestering meaning?
Well, one of the points on this Maui County Climate Action 4x6 card that I handed you says, about halfway down, it says carbon farming / reforestation. The mayor supported acquisition of a very large parcel, the old Von Temsky parcel up in Upper Kula, that's 3,274 acres on the slopes of Haleakala for reforestation and carbon sequestration. So in replanting what is right now an open pasture, and if you're down country, you can look up towards Ulupalakua or that part of the mountain, and you can see that there is a swath there that's not forested. It's very visible to the naked eye from, you know, most parts of this island. So there is discussion of reforesting that with natives systematically, having school classes come in and take a section, and then they're, you know, invested in it.
It's funny to me. I don't know how funny it is. When you're saying all this, it reminds me in 1990, I want to say 4, I went to the middle of Abiquiu, New Mexico, in a little ranch. There's a guy named Paolo Lugari and Gunter Pauli. Now, these were guys out in the middle of nowhere. Gunter Pauli is the head of the Zero Emissions Research Institute, now based in San Francisco. You may have seen him at the conference here the weekend, possible. But way back when, Paolo Lugari was a professor in Columbia at the university, and he wanted to do something about the carbon footprint. And they were carbon emissions way back then. There were credits, I don't know if they're still around, where countries could get credits if someone else did carbon sequestration. They would be able to do more of their burning and irresponsible things in their country. So in Brazil, there was a major reforestation effort, and Gaviotis out in the middle of nowhere, unbelievable, 100 zillion, I don't want to give numbers, hectares, acres of land reforested, created a product to make the best turpentine, created a village, created better health through water that came off trees. So many of these things, that's many years, I can't almost believe it's so many years ago. And when we're doing things now, I'm glad it's on the list, but I just wonder, what can we do to speed up our action? We seem to know what's going on for a long time, and although our current president may not have acknowledged it, most everyone else I know is acknowledging global climate change. Is there anything more we can do? I mean, I'm glad to hear these things are going on.
Well, getting back to what you said earlier, Jason, what we can do is act locally, and that can be on a very individual basis. A gentleman named Paul Hawken, who's a very well-known and regarded author, was a keynote speaker at a conference I went to last October in San Diego. It was the annual meeting of the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, and that was It's a group that's been around for about 10 years that Maui County recently joined. The other 3 counties in Hawaii are also members, and so we were actually the only state fully represented when we went there last October. Well, Paul Hawken, as keynote speaker, was talking about his new book, which I highly recommend to everyone who's listening, and their friends and their family and everybody. It's called Drawdown. He involved 200-some scientists and asked for their best scientific studies and their best ideas and strategies for drawing down the carbon that's currently in the atmosphere. And as I've said before, everybody's talking about reducing emissions and nobody's doing it fast enough. So these pledges are great. We need these pledges. If we're going to achieve them, we've got to set our goals. And, you know, some people say they're not ambitious enough, we're not acting fast enough. They may be realistic goals because we can't do it overnight. But at the same time, I think we need to really emphasize all the ways that we can draw down the carbon that's in the atmosphere. That's the name of the book. Paul Hawken is not the author, but he compiled it, and it's beautiful, all the strategy he had. There are things that are like empowering women is one of the ways, you know, globally that will help us draw down more carbon. It's just, through education, through
thank you for mentioning that book.
Yeah, through how we deal with food production and how we deal with food afterwards. There's been a statistic circulating recently that I keep hearing that 40% of the food that's raised in the U.S. doesn't get consumed for one reason or another, and it could just be it's cosmetically not going to make it. An apple with a bad spot on it is not going to be the apple you pick when you go to the supermarket. So we've tended to raise foods that are cosmetically good. They may not be the best nutritionally. And if you look at those heirloom tomatoes, they're all goofy shaped and funny colors, but they're,
delicious and good for you.
And nutritious.
Yeah.
Right. So we don't currently have the ability with our State Department of Health's permitting to do broad commercial composting of food waste, and I think that is one of the things that could benefit us. And through a recycling grant that we awarded a couple of months ago, there are folks out in West Maui who are establishing a business plan and looking for a location to do exactly that, to do green waste composting that can also include food waste, which would give it a nutritional boost. So you'd have nutrient-rich compost and not just, wood chips or mulch.
That's good to hear. That's good to hear. So this global conference, I mean, I want to go back to that because that was really a lot happened there. Things there that gave you a real strong impression. Give me your hit. I mean, I know that you had a general impression and came away with things that you'd really want to share. So I want to give you that platform.
Well, thank you. Who made a big impression on me is Jane Goodall, who's well known for her work with the chimpanzees in the last century. And since then, she's become a spokesperson for the United Nations Environmental Program and travels some 300 days of the year speaking and just sharing her wisdom. And oh my gosh, does she have some wisdom. And she has such a calm presence, and she just speaks so clearly, and she's got a sense of humor. She's 84 years old. She had a sit down that I attended with Alec Baldwin in a smaller theater, not the big convention hall. And then next day she was on the big stage as well. And she's been out of the jungle since I think the 1990s, although her work continues with some of the primates there. But she said things changed significantly when she went up in an airplane and saw all the clear cutting that had been done around the forest where she was working, and she was absolutely shocked. So she spoke to the solution of keeping forests in place, and that's nothing new that we've been talking about. Don't cut down the rainforest. But she shared a statistic that still to this day we are losing forests at a rate of 1 acre per second. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 acres of forest just was lost here, Jason. How can this be? It's hard to fathom. And then we're not just losing trees, we're losing the ability to sequester carbon. We're losing their ability to hold soil in place.
All the plants and animals that are gone?
Every living species that they supported and that supported each other. So that's some big stuff there. And, reforesting is great, but, she spoke very clearly and bluntly.
Things that are there stay there.
Right.
So how does everyone react to that? Well, we know now we can get water from the air, power from the sun. We can plan communities, leave forests where they are, use other, excuse my word, crappy, we're allowed to say that on radio, land, and make it good land. We can do things now with our technology. Did we hear any translation of that in promises? Anything on it?
Well, I want to continue on the the forest and rainforest topic by including that there were indigenous people represented at the conference. They reached out, they brought people there and reminded us that the indigenous people around the world have learned to live in harmony with the resources around them. They're not going to use too much. They're going to use just the right. They understand the nuances of what's growing there, of the weather and the planning with the moon and just all of these. It's indigenous wisdom, but it's really a different level of science. It's a science of observation and adaptation. And that was poignant as well. Here in urban America or any big city around the world, we tend to forget that we are connected with every other living thing on this planet.
We sure do forget.
Yeah.
So that's why I guess I asked the question kind of the way I'm asking it, because those of us that are aware of it are aware that we can make planning. We're on an island, and so again, we're limited in what we can do, but I don't want to get off in a tangent, but there's lots of areas we can do without taking down our forests. And I'm really glad to hear the idea of reforestation was in the mayor's craw. I mean, I can't even tell you. I had that pledge in 1994 with Paolo Ligari and Gunter, but never had a way of implementing. That's what I talked to you about, wanting to be somehow in touch with players. I've been sort of marginalized because before, when I was green, I was considered radical. And that label is still sort of there, but it was never. And you can see it's not radical at all. It was just time to take some actions. We hear that in politics now. Sometimes they get angry, but I just want to see more aggressive contemplation. You're talking about economic development.
Yeah, Jason, if I may, I don't know if your listeners know that you've been involved for a very long time in just raising the level of conversation on this island to make sure that there are issues and topics that are in our conversation and not forgotten. And boy, back almost 20 years ago when I was abducted by aliens who told me to run for office, and I mean that's the only explanation I could give it. No, that's I say that in jest, but it seems like a lifetime ago that I ran for council, and then 2 years later ran for mayor. And I did so because I felt very strongly in my gut that we needed a voice for certain issues. We were losing our beaches at a unprecedented rate back then to development. Palauea Beach was kind of a heartbreaker for many, many people when we sold 7 out of 9 lots, and now we have an acre that the county owns, but it's just kind of like a pathway, in between the mega mansions. But at that time, you gave voice to political candidates by offering to film a video that could then be shared on Akaku. And I don't know if your listeners know that, but you just gave voice to people who really wanted to make a positive difference. And without inserting your own agenda in any big way, you just made it happen. And I want to say mahalo for that.
I appreciate that. I do. I appreciate that. I used to think that when industries would come here, they would see me here in Maui and wouldn't have to bring in their heavy hitters from the mainland. But in some ways, I've been bypassed in some ways. And I'm very much appreciating that you've noticed, because that has been what I've been doing, and it has been my commitment a lot of years. We got a couple of minutes, 2 minutes to go. What would you like to leave our listeners with, or things that you might want to share with them that are important?
Well, gosh, I mean, it's an election year. We haven't really talked about that, but I would say register to vote and go out and vote. I mentioned Paul Hawken earlier and his book, Drawdown. He said one thing at the USDN annual meeting that I attended that stuck with me. As he's going through this book and lists of solutions for pulling carbon out of the atmosphere, he said there's no solution that's too small. And so I would pass that on and just say, you know, we can feel like this is such a daunting task to turn around the ship in the middle of the ocean here and get it to go a different direction than the one that we're sailing on. And whatever small steps that we can take individually and as a community, those are the right things. You know, the alternative is do nothing, and that's not working. So,
well, I appreciate that. I also want to appreciate and acknowledge you. You have been a champion. And although, like you say, we were both doing the same kind of advocate thing, you've been in an important role and right there swinging for us all. Thank you for all that you've given and all that you've served all these years.
You're welcome.
May
Thanks,
good
Jason.
things happen with you and your family. I'm so happy to say that we are at the end of our show, and we're going to have more shows with Rob in the future at the Maui Neutral Zone. Thank you all for joining us today.
Mahalo.
Elevate your Thursday nights with